They looked at my background and said I would never succeed. They looked at me and concluded my future. But what they didn't know was that God had already written a different ending. They said it so casually, like they were talking about the weather, like my life was already concluded before it even started. I remember the first time those words truly sank into my bones. I was standing in our compound in Nigerian, Lagos, barefoot on the hot sand. The afternoon sun pressing down on my head like it had something personal against me. Our compound was one of those crowded ones where everybody knew everybody's business, where secrets didn't last longer than the smell of fried akara in the morning. Children were running around with torn slippers, women were shouting over buckets of water, and men were arguing loudly about football and politics. That day, I was just a skinny girl with an oversized t-shirt and torn skirts, with dreams that felt too big for my body. I overheard two adults talking near the tap where we fetched water. One of them laughed and said, "This one, with this kind of family, she will not amount to anything in life." The other nodded slowly as if it was a well-researched conclusion. I froze. They didn't know I could hear them, or maybe they didn't care. That sentence followed me like a shadow, growing longer as I grew older, sticking to me in school, at home, even in church. I was born into a family that struggled loudly and publicly. My father was a commercial bus driver, the kind that came home smelling of sweat, petrol, and frustration. Some days he brought money, many days he brought silence. My mother sold food by the roadside, rice, beans, sometimes eba when garri was cheap. She woke up before dawn and slept long after the generators around us went quiet. Our room was small, paint peeling from the walls, ceiling stained brown from years of leaking rainwater. When it rained, we moved our mattress from one corner to another like a slow dance we had mastered. Yet in that small room, my dreams were loud. I dreamed of a life where my mother wouldn't have to shout to sell food, where my father wouldn't come home with slumped shoulders, where my name would be spoken with respect. But in Ajegunle, dreams like that were often treated as jokes. School was now kinder. I attended a public secondary school where classrooms were overcrowded and teachers were tired. Some of them meant well, but many had already given up. I remember one teacher in particular, tall, always angry, chalk dust permanently living on his fingers. One day, after I failed the mathematics test, he called me out in front of the class. He didn't just scold me, he laughed. "You children from this area," he said, waving his hand like he was brushing away flies. "You think life is by dreaming? People like you will just grow up and suffer." The class laughed, some nervously, some loudly. I laughed too because I didn't want to cry. That laughter became my shield, even as something inside me cracked quietly. At home, things weren't easier. My father loved me, I know that now, but at the time, his frustration often came out as harsh words. Anytime I talked about wanting more, university, a good job, traveling beyond Lagos, he would sigh deeply and say, "My daughter Bola, be realistic. Life is hard. Don't set yourself up for disappointment." Sometimes my uncles would visit. and compare me to their children who were doing better. They would talk about me like I wasn't in the room. This girl is too quiet. She's always reading nonsense books. In this Nigeria, who reading book help? Each word felt like another nail, sealing a box they were already preparing to put me in. But there was something I never told anyone then. Something that burned quietly inside me. Late at night, when the noise of the compound died down and the only sound was the distant hum of generators, I would sit by the window and talk to God. Not fancy prayers, not the kind people shouted in church, just honest talk. I would tell him how angry I was, how scared I felt, how I didn't want my life to end where I was born. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I just stared into darkness. I didn't know the theology. I didn't know big Bible grammar. All I knew was that if God truly existed, then he had to see me, and if he saw me, then maybe, just maybe, my life wasn't already finished, like people said. Nigeria has a way of testing your faith daily. Power would go off when you needed it most. Money would finish just when school fees were due. Opportunities always seem to pass in front of you and stop for someone else. I watched people my age drop out of school, join bad gangs, or give up entirely, or even go into prostitution. Some became hardened, some became bitter, some just disappeared. Every time that happened, the voices came back. You see, this is how it ends. But something inside me refused to agree, even when I didn't know what the alternative looked like. That day, everything truly began to change. It did not come with thunder or prophecy. It came quietly, almost rudely, almost ordinarily. It was a hot afternoon, the kind where the sun feels personal again. I had just returned from school, hungry and tired, when my mother called me and said there was someone who wanted to see me. Standing in front of our room was a man I had never seen before. Neatly dressed, calm eyes, carrying himself like someone who had seen life and survived it. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. And when he finally opened his mouth, the first thing he said was, "Young woman, do you believe God can rewrite a story everyone else has given up on?" At that moment, I didn't know it yet, but that single question was a crack that would eventually break every limitation placed on my life. And as I stood there, confused, hopeful, and afraid all at once, I had no idea that the same people who once said I would not amount to anything would one day struggle to recognize the person I was about to become. That man stood there like he didn't belong to the chaos of our compound. While people were shouting over water, children were chasing tires, and generators were coughing themselves awake. He looked calm, almost untouched by it all. His clothes were simple but clean, not the loud kind that screamed money, but the quiet kind that whispered discipline. My mother wiped her hands on her wrapper nervously, smiling too much, the way she always did when she wasn't sure whether to be hopeful or afraid. I remember thinking, who is this man and why is he here because of me? When he asked that question, whether I believed God could rewrite a story everyone had given up on, I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't believe, but because no adult had ever asked me a question like that before. Adults usually told me what was, not what could be. He introduced himself as Mr. Alabi. He said he used to live in the area years ago, before life took him elsewhere. He explained that he now worked with a small educational foundation that helped young people. who showed hunger for more. Hunger, that word hit me harder than any insult ever had. Hunger was something I understood very well. Physical hunger that made your stomach twist, and mental hunger that made your mind restless. He said someone from my school had mentioned my name. I tried to remember who could have done that, running through faces in my head, but nothing came up. In that moment, all I could feel was fear. Nigeria had trained me to be suspicious of good news. Too many times, hope had showed up wearing the mask of disappointment. Mr. Alabi asked to sit, and my mother quickly brought out the only plastic chair we had, apologizing too much for the condition of the room. He waved it off kindly. He asked me questions, simple questions. What did I like to read? What did I want to become? What did I think was wrong with the world around me? As I answered, I noticed something strange. He was listening, truly listening, not interrupting, not correcting, not laughing. For the first time in my life, my words felt like they mattered. When I told him I wanted to go to university but didn't know how it could happen, he nodded slowly, like that was not a foolish dream but a serious plan, waiting for a structure. Then he said something that shook me. He said, "Young woman, talent without exposure dies quietly, but exposure without character dies loudly. I want to help you, but help will not be easy." My heart started beating faster. Help? In my house? In Ajegunle? That would feel too big to fit into the room. He explained that the foundation was offering a scholarship opportunity, but it will require commitment, extra reading, weekend classes, discipline, and faith. He said many people have started and quit. Nigeria will try to frustrate you, he added calmly. Your family might not understand. Your friends might mock you, but if you stay, your life will change. That night, I could not sleep. The ceiling fan was not working. NEPA had taken light again, and mosquitoes were doing their usual patrol. I stared into the darkness, replaying his words over and over. My mind argued with itself. What if this is fake? What if I fail again? What if I try and prove everyone right? But another voice, quieter, steadier, whispered back, what if this is God answering those late night talks? I remembered all the times people said I would not amount to anything. I remembered the laughter in class, the sighs at home, the pity in people's eyes. And for the first time, instead of shrinking under those memories, I felt something rise inside me, anger mixed with hope. When I told my father about the opportunity, his reaction was exactly what I feared. He laughed softly, not mocking but tired. My daughter, he said, rubbing his face. People have promised help before. Don't let your heart break again. My mother was quieter. She listened, nodded, and later that night, when my father had fallen asleep, she whispered to me, if God is involved, try, even if it's hard. That sentence stayed with me. If God is involved, try. It became my private slogan. The first day I attended the Foundations program felt like walking into another world. The building was not fancy, but it was organized. There were other young people there, some from backgrounds even worse than mine, some from slightly better homes, but all carrying the same look in their eyes, cautious hope. The instructors were strict. They didn't pity us. They pushed us. If you were late, you were sent home. If you didn't read, you were embarrassed with questions you couldn't answer. At first, I struggled. My confidence was low, my foundation weak. Many nights I came home exhausted, wondering if I was fooling myself. The mocking started almost immediately. Friends from my area called me names. Some said I was wasting time when I could be learning a trade. Others said I thought I was better than them. Even relatives joined. This one has started chasing white man education. One uncle joked during a family visit. I laughed along, but inside the old fear was knocking loudly. There were days I wanted to quit. Days when transport money was a problem. Days when hunger distracted me so much I couldn't focus. Days when I failed tests and felt like that teacher's voice from years ago was finally winning. But every time I felt like giving up, something strange would happen. Sometimes it was a scripture shared during morning devotion. Sometimes it was a quiet word from Mr. Alabi. Sometimes it was just a sudden strength I couldn't explain. Slowly, painfully, I started to improve. My reading speed increased. My understanding deepened. For the first time, I began to see patterns in life. How discipline today could change tomorrow. How sacrifice now could rewrite destiny later. One evening, after a particularly hard week, Mr. Alabi called me aside. He looked serious. My heart sank, thinking maybe I had failed beyond repair. Instead, he said, I see something in you, but what is coming next will test you more than poverty ever did. He paused, then added, opportunity attracts responsibility, and responsibility attracts opposition. I didn't fully understand what he meant then. I just nodded. As I walked home that night, the sky dark and heavy with rain clouds, I felt it. A sense that my life was standing at the edge of something dangerous and beautiful at the same time. I didn't know who or what would try to stop me. I didn't know how hard it would get. All I knew was that the same voices that once said I would not amount to anything were about to get much louder. And deep inside, I wondered whether my faith was strong enough to survive what was coming next. Becoming serious about that opportunity changed how people looked at me, and not in a good way. In Nigeria, when a young woman starts acting like she wants more than survival, people get uncomfortable. It was no longer just about poverty or background. Now it was about gender. Neighbors began to whisper. Some said I was proud. Some said I was stubborn. Some said I was being misled. I noticed how their eyes followed me whenever I left the house with my books tucked under my arm. I was no longer just the girl from the struggling family. I was now that girl that thinks too much of herself. Even some women, older women, looked at me with a mix of pity and warning, like they were silently telling me not to try to escape a destiny they themselves had accepted long ago. At home, the pressure became heavier. My mother supported me in her quiet way, but I could see the fear in her eyes every time I returned late from classes or stayed up late, reading under a dim torchlight. She worried about my safety, about my reputation, about what people would say. My father, on the other hand, became more distant, not cruel, just withdrawn. In his mind, the world was already hard enough on women. Why was I adding more trouble to my life by dreaming too big? One night, after an argument that ended in silence, I heard a mutter to my mother. This girl would break her own heart. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe he was right. The foundation program grew tougher. The expectations increased, and so did the pressure. We were giving mock exams that exposed every weakness I had tried to hide. The truth hit me hard. I was not as smart as I thought I was. I had gaps, big ones. There were days I sat in class feeling like an imposter, like someone would stand up in class and shout, "What is this girl doing here?" Some of the boys were confident, loud, and already imagining themselves as future leaders. I shrank beside them, questioning my place. Nigeria has a way of teaching women to doubt themselves early, and that lesson was echoing loudly in my head. Then came the setback that nearly destroyed me. It was during a crucial assessment week, one that would determine who would stay in the program and who was quietly dropped. I studied harder than I had ever done in my life. I skipped meals. I read until my eyes burned. I prayed like my life depended on it. Because in many ways it did. When the results came out, I scanned the list with shaking hands. My name was there, but barely. I had passed. Yes, but not well, not impressively, not in the way that secured confidence. I overheard two instructors talking later that day. One of them said, "She tries, but I'm not sure she has what it takes long term." That sentence felt like a knife. It sounded too familiar, too close to what I have heard all my life. The real blow came a week later. I was called into the office. Mr. Alabi was there, but so was another senior coordinator I didn't know well. Their faces were serious. My heart dropped before anyone spoke. They explained calmly that funding was limited, that the foundation had to focus resources on those with the highest potential, that decisions were difficult but necessary. As they spoke, I stopped hearing words and started hearing echoes of my past. She will not amount to anything. Be realistic. This girl is dreaming too much. When they finally said, "We are considering suspending your scholarship temporarily," I felt my chest tighten. Temporarily. That word sounded polite, but it carried the weight of rejection. I walked out of the office in a daze. The sun was too bright, the noise too loud. I felt exposed, like everyone could see the failure written on my face. On my way home, I sat by the roadside for a long time, watching buses splash dirty water on pedestrians, watching people rush by with their own problems. For the first time since this journey began, I asked myself a dangerous question. What if they are right? What if God was silent after all? What if this was just another attempt that would end in shame? That night I didn't pray, I didn't read, I didn't talk. I lay on my mattress facing the wall, letting tears soak into the thin foam. My mother tried to speak to me. I pretended to be asleep. I was tired, not just physically, but emotionally. Tired of fighting invisible battles, tired of proving myself, tired of hoping. I thought about all the women I knew who had once dreamed and then adjusted those dreams to fit reality. Maybe that was wisdom, not failure. Maybe surrender was easier than persistence. The following days were dark. I stopped attending classes. I avoided phone calls. I told myself I needed time. But deep down, I was hiding. The voices grew louder in my head. You see, this is how it ends. I started to imagine a future that looked exactly like my present, struggling, managing, surviving, but never rising. That image scared me more than poverty ever had. Then one afternoon, as I sat alone in the room, something happened that shook me to my core. There was a knock at the door. Not that casual knock of a neighbor, not the impatient knock of someone in a hurry. It was firm, intentional. My mother wasn't around. I almost didn't answer. When I finally did, standing there was Mr. Alabi alone. No file, no official tone, just him. He looked at me for a long time. His eyes filled with something I couldn't immediately name. Then he said quietly, "I was hoping you wouldn't disappear." I wanted to cry, I wanted to shout. Instead, I stepped aside and let him in. He sat down and said something that changed everything. He said, "Do you know why people give up on women like you? Because they mistake softness for weakness. But God often hides strength in quiet places. I listened, my heart pounding. He told me the suspension was not the end, that it was a test, that someone had argued strongly against me, saying I would eventually waste the investment, and that someone else had argued just as strongly for me. Then he leaned forward and said, "What happens next depends on whether you believe God's opinion more than people's conclusions." As he stood up to leave, he turned back and added, "Your story is not over, but the next chapter will hurt before it heals." After he left, I sat there trembling, knowing deep inside that the real battle had only just begun. And for the first time, I sensed that the opposition ahead would not come from strangers, but from people very close to me. The opposition did not wait long to reveal itself. It crept into my life quietly, wearing familiar faces and using words that sounded like concern but carried the weight of fear. It started at home. My father called for a family meeting one evening, something he rarely did unless there was serious trouble. We sat in the small room, the kerosene lamp flickering because NEPA had once again taken light. The shadows on the wall danced nervously as he cleared his throat and spoke. He said people had been talking. He said my name was coming up in conversations where it shouldn't. He said some people believed I was becoming too exposed for a young woman without a husband. Each sentence landed like a slap. I sat there, hands folded, listening as my life was discussed, like a problem that needed correction. An auntie who lived nearby had apparently taken it upon herself to advise my parents. According to her, a girl who moved around too much in the name of education was inviting trouble. She warned that opportunities often came with hidden prizes, especially for girls. Her words planted fear like poison seeds. My father repeated them not maliciously but faithfully, like someone passing along a message he believed could save me. "I don't want to hear stories about you tomorrow," he said, his voice heavy with worry. "This life is not fair to women." I wanted to scream that I already knew that. I wanted to ask if fairness was the reason I should shrink myself. But Nigerian homes are not places where young women argue easily. Silence is often mistaken for respect, and at that night, I swallowed my pain whole. The next blow came from the community. One Saturday morning, I stepped out to fetch water, and the atmosphere felt different. Conversations paused when I passed. Eyes lingered too long. I heard my name whispered, followed by laughter that stopped abruptly when I turned around. My chest tightened. By the time I returned home, my hands were shaking. Later that day, my mother finally told me what had happened. Someone had gone around saying I was using the foundation as an excuse to follow big men. The words made me feel physically sick. In a society where a woman's reputation can be destroyed without evidence, a rumor is often enough to end everything. I locked myself in the room and cried until my head hurt. All the effort, the discipline, the sacrifices reduced to gossip. I questioned God angrily. Is this what obedience brings? Is this the reward for trying? The temptation to quit became overwhelming. If I stopped attending the program, the rumors would die. If I stayed, they would grow. That was a trap. Either way, I seemed to lose. But faith or God or life, whatever name one chooses, had not finished testing me. A few days later, I was asked to attend a public forum organized by the foundation. It was meant to be a small gathering where participants showed their journeys. I almost didn't go. My confidence was already fragile, and the idea of standing before people felt unbearable. But Mr. Alabi insisted gently. Visibility is uncomfortable, he said, but hiding will cost you more, so I went. The hall was modest but full. Parents, sponsors, instructors, and students sat in rows of plastic chairs. When my name was called, my legs nearly gave way. I walked to the front, my heart pounding so loudly. I was sure the microphone would pick it up. I started speaking softly, telling my story, where I came from, what the opportunity meant to me, how close I had come to giving up. I was not prepared for what happened next. From the back of the hall, a voice interrupted. It was a woman, older, confident. She stood up and said, "Excuse me, but how do we know this girl is serious? We have seen many like her. They start well, then disappoint everyone." The room went silent. I felt exposed, naked. My mouth went dry. I looked towards the panel for help, but no one spoke immediately. Seconds stretched like hours. My entire life flashed before me. Every insult, every doubt, every whispered prophecy of failure. Something broke inside me. Instead of shrinking, I spoke. My voice trembled. I said I was tired of being judged by assumptions. I said I was not perfect, but I was committed. I said if being a woman meant I had to prove my sincerity twice as hard, then I would do it. I said I was not asking for pity, only for a chance. As I spoke, I felt tears running down my face, but I did not stop. When I finished, the room remained quiet for a moment before soft clapping started. It grew loud. That night should have been a victory, but Nigeria rarely allows unchallenged wins. When I returned home, my father was waiting. Someone had already called him. He was angry not because I spoke, but because I spoke publicly. He said I embarrassed the family by putting our struggles in the open. He said dignity was silence. The argument escalated until he finally said the words I had feared my entire life. "If you continue like this, don't expect my support." My heart shattered. That was not just withdrawal of money, it was withdrawal of approval. In our culture, that kind of distance can break a child completely. That night, I packed a small bag, not to run away, but to prepare my heart. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I could not remain the same. As I sat on the bed holding my Bible tightly, I whispered a prayer through tears. "God, if you truly planned this, then you will have to stand for me, because I am standing alone." Outside, thunder rolled. Rain began to fall heavily, drumming against the zinc roofs of the compound. It felt symbolic, like heaven itself was restless. In that moment, I sensed a shift. Not relief, but resolve. I understood something painful and powerful at the same time. Obedience would cost me comfort before it brought me peace. And just as I thought I had reached the lowest point, my phone buzzed with a message that would force me to make the most difficult decision of my life. The message that entered my phone that rainy night did not look dramatic at first. No long explanation, no emojis, just a few words that will quietly change everything. "Please come to the office tomorrow morning. It's important." It was from Mr. Alabi. I stared at the screen for a long time, my heart racing. Important could mean anything. In Nigeria, important has a way of sitting between miracle and disaster. I barely slept that night. Every time thunder cracked, my thoughts scattered. I replayed the argument with my father. I replayed the public confrontation at the forum. I replayed all the moments people had told me directly or indirectly that I was reaching beyond my place. By morning, the rain had washed the streets clean, but my mind was still heavy. I dressed simply, tied my hair neatly, and stepped out of the house quietly. My father did not speak to me. My mother slipped some transport money into my hand and held it tightly for a second longer than usual. She didn't say much, but her eyes said everything: fear, hope, prayer. As I walked to the bus stop, my legs felt weak. I told myself that whatever happened today, I would not cry in front of anyone. I had cried enough in private. When I got to the office, the atmosphere felt different. Too quiet, too calm. Mr. Adeyemi greeted me warmly and asked me to sit. There were other people in the room this time, unfamiliar faces, well-dressed, serious. My chest tightened again. He began to speak slowly. He explained that after the forum incident, the foundation had reviewed my journey closely, my attendance, my discipline, my growth. He said something unexpected. The opposition I faced had forced them to look deeper, not shallower. One of the visitors leaned forward and said, "We're not just interested in excellence, we are interested in resilience." Then came the words I never imagined hearing. They told me the scholarship suspension had been lifted permanently. Not only that, but an additional sponsor had committed to supporting me fully through university if I maintained the same character. For a moment, I couldn't process it. My ears heard the words, but my mind lagged behind. I just sat there frozen, tears pooling in my eyes. Mr. Alabi smiled gently and said, "God sometimes allows the fire not to burn you, but to reveal you." I left that office in shock. Not the loud, screaming kind of joy, the quiet, trembling kind that feels too sacred to announce immediately. On my way home, the city looked different. The same potholes, the same noise, the same struggle, but I was different inside. For the first time, I understood that my life was no longer just about escaping poverty. It was about purpose, about proving that background does not cancel destiny. Telling my parents was not easy. My mother cried openly, praising God with her hands lifted. My father was silent for a long time, then he cleared his throat and said quietly, "Bola, I was afraid for you." That sentence healed something in me. It wasn't an apology, but it was honesty. In that moment, I realized that many people who doubt you are not evil. They are scared of disappointment, scared of hope, scared of change. The years that followed were not magically easy. I worked harder than ever. I failed some exams. I passed others narrowly. I learned how lonely growth can be. Some friends drifted away. Some people only remembered me when they needed help. But doors kept opening, not because I was perfect, but because I was prepared. University exposed me to worlds I never imagined. I walked into classrooms where my accent made people curious. I entered spaces where no one knew my past, only my performance. Slowly, my confidence became quiet and steady, no longer desperate for validation. The greatest moment of vindication did not come with applause. It came years later when I was invited to speak at a community program in the same area where I grew up. I stood before young women who looked like my younger self, uncertain, brilliant, afraid. Some of the same people who once whispered now sat listening. Some nodded, some avoided my eyes. I didn't resent them, I understood them. When I spoke, I didn't boast, I told the truth. I told them that faith is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move anyway. I told them that God's plan often looks foolish before it looks powerful. After the event, a woman approached me quietly. She looked familiar. It was the same woman who had challenged me publicly years ago. She said softly, "I misjudged you." I smiled and said, "I understand." And I truly did. Today, when I look back, I no longer feel anger towards those who said I would not amount to anything. Their words did not define me, they refined me. Every doubt became fuel. Every rejection became direction. God did not just change my story, He used it. He used my story to teach me compassion. He used my story to teach me patience. He used my story to remind me that purpose often comes disguised as pressure. If there is one thing my journey has taught me, it is this. When God has other plans for you, no opinion can cancel them. Not poverty, not gender, not rumors, not even family fear. The road will hurt. It will test you. It will strip you. But if you stay, if you trust, if you keep moving, the same people who doubted you will one day tell your story in amazement. They said I would not amount to anything in life, but God had other plans for me, and He is not done yet.